Britain specifically are feeling poorer now for very specific reasons that are to do with your economy, structural issues with your labour market, with infrastructure, with energy capacity, with your housing market. That's before we even get on to Brexit.
This IMF report, whatever else it was still bad news politically, wasn't it, for the Chancellor and the Prime Minister?
On the one hand, it was, right. It's never good to have a big international... it's never good to have the IMF pour a load of... how should I say this politely? It's never good to have the IMF be critical of your economy, and it's certainly not a nice comparison to say, oh, you'll be the only developed country not growing their economy, and even Russia will have some growth despite all of the world sanctions and things. So on the one hand, you think, God, what another nightmare for Rishi. More rubbish about the economy. Can he ever get a break? But on the other hand, as you will well know, it is rallying to Tory MPs to have a go at the IMF. And in a way, the IMF has just presented themselves as this enemy, which the Tory MPs, who are deeply divided about most things, including the economy, by the way, can unite behind and throw their vitriol at. When was the last time the IMF were right? Isn't this the IMF, this evil international organisation, playing Britain down? And so I think in a way, it's actually been a little bit rallying for Tory MPs who are all allowed to go studs up on the IMF today. I will say, though, things like this just reignite that debate, which is, what's your vision for growth, Rishi? When are you going to cut taxes, Rishi? And that is a bit of a nightmare for him, because he's not going to cut taxes anytime soon. And it's a bit unclear what his vision for growth is, actually.
Yeah, and it has had the effect, apart from anything else, of putting up the temperature under that debate in the Tory party just a notch or two as well, Rachel.
I think the point about it rallying Tory MPs is certainly true. You've got an enemy, a common enemy, and any time you've got that, you get the political support that comes with it. But the problem with that perspective, if you're a Conservative MP, is that people feel poorer. We're in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and when the government is saying yes, but it's because of COVID, yes, but it's because of Russia and Ukraine and inflation, it's global forces. You are feeling it now, but so is all of Europe.
Yeah.
And then the IMF comes and goes, yeah, a bit of that everywhere, but you, Britain specifically, are feeling poorer now for very specific reasons that are to do with your economy, structural issues with your labour market, with infrastructure, with energy capacity, with your housing market. That's before we even get on to Brexit. There are specific reasons why the UK is faring really badly. People can feel that, and a Tory MP saying, it's the IMF trying to talk Britain down, doesn't make it easier for them to do their weekly food shop or to, feed the energy meter that they've all been switched onto. We've got a high number of people being switched onto prepayment meters, and it doesn't really, whether you think the IMF is talking Britain down or not, it doesn't change the scale of the challenge that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have if we are to get out of this.
Yeah, the all-important X factor here is, what do the public make of it? So speaking of that, let's all have a chat to Joe Twyman, who has always got a good take on all of this, the founder of Deltapoll. Hello, Joe.
Good evening, John.
Great to have you here, Joe, as always. Look, we're going to come on to the B word a little later on, inevitably, in this conversation. I want to park that just for a second right now. What's the latest data on the way the public are thinking about the economy? And first of all, the big question of economic trust. What do you see?
Well, it's not good. It's not good news for the Conservatives. More than half of respondents believe that the government is handling the economy badly, which is a bad situation to be in. Labour are 14 points ahead on the question of who would be best to deal with the economy. They're also ahead on who would be able to deal with the cost of living specifically, which remains for many people the most important issue.
Before you go on, that point there, 14 points ahead. That is a yawning lead on economic trust. If you were in Labour Party headquarters and you saw that for the first time, you would be popping champagne corks. Is that the trend of the polls at the moment, or is that the latest poll? What's the strength of that really strong lead on economic trust?
That has consistently tallied very closely with the lead that Labour has had against the Conservatives on voting intention. And so Labour have consistently enjoyed a double-digit lead against the Conservatives when it comes to voting in the general election. and they've consistently been ahead by similar margins when it comes to the economy. And this has traditionally been a hugely important variable. It's never been the case that a party has come from behind on leadership and on economic competence to win the most seats at a general election. Never happened. And that is the situation the Conservatives find themselves in at the moment, behind on both. And looking beyond the headline figures, you can see that when it comes to the economy, the story is really very bad for the Conservatives as things stand at the moment. More than 4 out of 10 households believe that their own personal financial situation is bad. That's more than double the number that think it's good, and more than 7 out of 10 believe that the country's economic situation is bad. If that were not bad enough, you then have the difficulty that in terms of economic expectation, so not just where we are now, but where things are going, that which has traditionally been the most important metric that parties want to win in their favour, you have just under half of people believing that their own economic circumstances will get worse, and just over half believing that the country's economic circumstances will get worse over the next 12 months. You compare that to only around 1 in 5 who think it will get better, and it shows the depth of the hole that the Conservatives are in at the moment.
That is a fistful of dud cards, as you describe it there, Joe, in the hand of the government. Kate?
Yeah, Joe, hi, it's Kate Ferguson here. I wondered, in your polling, do you get any sense of what Brits want to fix the economy? So are they hankering after tax cuts the same way Tory MPs are? Or do they think fixing the strikes will be the key way out? Have you got any sense of what will fill them with a bit of optimism?
Yes, that's a really good question, Kate, and one that we have asked. And we find that by some distance, it's control of inflation that people prioritise. And yes, economic growth is in there, but it's some way behind. And cutting taxes is really not a priority for many people at all, as things stand at the moment. Now, that doesn't mean that people won't, in some cases, view cutting taxes positively, but it's not one of those top priorities. For so many people, the cost of living and inflation and how the two interact with each other is the most important issue. And so for many people, that's the top priority.
So in a way, when Rishi says, I'm not going to cut your taxes now, but I'm going to focus on inflation, I'm not going to give big pay rises out to public sector because that will be inflationary. You think he's got the right strategy, although he's obviously in the doldrums in the polls over it?
Overall, I would say that the strategy, in theory, is a good one to focus on keeping the cost of living down, if not at least averting any further rises. The difficulty that the Conservatives seem to have at the moment is that, given all the other distractions that are going on, they really appear, at least in polling terms, they appear to find it difficult to cut through with their economic policies and the broad narratives around the economy. So rather than the specifics around growth and inflation, which for many people can be a bit of an abstract concept, the broad narratives about whether it's going well or badly and whether the Conservatives can be trusted or not are all pointing in the wrong direction and don't appear to be changing anytime soon.
That is really interesting, because I want to get Rachel in on this as well. I mean, when it comes to inflation, people put a high value on cutting inflation. Now, maybe in a lot of people's minds, you can tell us, Joe, in people's minds, they think cutting the level of inflation is the same as cutting prices. It's not, is it? It's slowing down the rate at which prices are going up. Even when you start slowing down or even stopping inflation, prices are still where they are at the moment, which is unaffordable to a huge number of people. So when people say it's all about inflation, what do they really mean by that?
Well, what they really mean is the cost of living, and you're right that a cut in inflation is seen as a priority, but actually it just means that what people want is for things to get cheaper, and that is a particular problem around things like heating costs, which have of course increased so dramatically over the last few years. And if there isn't a similarly dramatic in terms of size fall, then a lot of people are still going to be struggling, even if inflation does come back to more reasonable levels. And of course that's what fuels perceptions, which are of course all important in this case. As we've seen time and again, it's all very well for people to be told growth is up, inflation is down, unemployment is down, but if they, and to quote a former Prime Minister, if the pound in their pocket doesn't feel like it's doing much good and much work, then that's not going to resonate well for the government.
We're going to